You're listening to Contesting Wrestling. It's coming out on October 25th, 2019.
Yeah, we're reflecting on episode 4, which featured Eddie Guerrero versus Rey Mysterio from WCW Halloween Havoc 1997.
Yep.
And the Ring of Honor Scramble Cage Melee. Big question or big issue that I just want to open up with. Much of our debate so far, insofar as it's been a debate over the value of wrestling, or much of Evan's complaints about wrestling have had to do with it not being satisfying from an entertainment perspective. That, a lot of it seems boring, a lot of it seems slow. Now, beyond just the question of wrestling being entertaining, I just want to point to an issue that some listeners might be thinking about that certainly comes up in the philosophical literature about art and art criticism and that sort of stuff, which is about the function of art. And there are a lot of people who would draw a strict boundary between art and entertainment and say that the function of art isn't just to satisfy the desires of consumers and just to entertain people, but to make you think, to make you feel certain things that you might actually be rather uncomfortable about, to draw attention to important aspects of society. And so there might be a larger question here about whether wrestling is capable of those things. Now, I am not an adherent of this strict art entertainment dichotomy. I think that it's actually very harmful in some ways. The American philosopher John Dewey talked about this in his book, Art as Experience. And he was talking about comic strips and jazzed music. But
Jazzed, like jazz in the past tense.
Right, like music that has been jazzed.
Okay.
And because those were relatively new art forms at the time he was writing.
So Coltrane jazzed my favorite things.
Exactly.
Okay.
And Dewey said, look, a lot of people...
I played that for our friend referee B. Ross, and she freaked the hell out. She grew up with the sound of music and had never heard anything resembling free jazz before.
It's an amazing piece.
Oh, yeah, and if you listen to it over the years, it just gets wilder and wilder as it
Listen to some of the versions from like 65.
So Dewey says, look, a lot of people consume things that they don't think of as art. But that they really have a close connection with things that are art, if not being art themselves. And it's to the detriment of the people consuming this stuff that they don't demand more of it because they don't think of it as art. If you think of it as just entertainment, well, then it can kind of suck. It doesn't have to make you think and it doesn't have to make you feel. But if you think of it as art and you demand more of it, then, you can, all of this time that you're spending with this thing could be more productive and more beneficial. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't spend time with things that, just simply entertain you and just simply make you feel good. But I think, if we were, jazz and comic strips have developed into way more sophisticated art forms than they were in their genesis. And I have that hope for professional wrestling, that the more critically we look at it and the more that viewers demand of it, the more it could possibly reach the level of artistry that other media have attained.
Based on what I've seen so far, and especially, when I think about this match, the Eddie Ray match, all wrestling would really need to do to get me at this point is change the ratio of how much of it sucks to how much of it is good. Like, seriously, because if I am terrified of the idea that we are eventually going to have to sit down and watch a full pay-per-view. Like, if I'm going to really fully get the experience of being a wrestling fan, I'm going to have to sit through like a 4 to 6 hour WrestleMania.
If not weeks of television building up to it.
I mean, I'll have to watch that too, because I'm trying to go for the full experience.
I'm honestly thinking we should start showing Evan a serial sooner than later, and I am honestly thinking it should be Power, because it's a tight hour. If you don't like anything, it's done in a couple of minutes. There's only a few episodes of it so far, and they're building up to their first pay-per-view.
I understand that not everything is going to be as good as this match, and from what I can understand within the wrestling fandom, this match is considered, in the upper echelon of
One of
matches.
the all-time classics for sure.
So
Anyway.
not everything is going to be this good, but yeah, I just need to not be afraid that I'm going to go and watch something for 4 hours and only like 10% of it.
Right. That's fair.
Oh, I've also been thinking about this question in light of the recent comments by directors like Francis Ford Coppola and Martin Scorsese directed at the Marvel comics movies, where, which have ranged between saying like these are bad movies to they are despicable and are corrupting our society.
Not cinema.
Right.
Is the phrase.
Yeah. And,
Outlaw Mud Show, fucking no.
There's a lot of different things you could say here. I think there are 3 different questions that we want to be asking if we're thinking about this stuff seriously. One question is any of this stuff bad for you? Second question, is it good? Does it have some value? Third question, is it art? Does it have the same value that we attribute to things that we want to call art? And those are 3 separate questions. And I think we can answer them in various different ways. I'd say...
Are we answering them for wrestling or for the Marvel movies?
I think there's a sort of a parallel. I mean, I think of them as sort of in the same wheelhouse, in the same vein. But like for any of them, my answers, to put them shortly, would be this. Are they bad for you? No, so long as you're not overdoing it, right? So like sugar, if they are just sugary treats that make you feel good, well, the thing about sugary treats is in small doses, they're fine. Now, anything you become addicted to, and this goes back to some other conversations we've had, anything that is hurting your life, is making you unhappy, is interfering with other things you're doing, anything that you can't stop doing if you want to, that's bad for you, right? So to the point where people can become addicted to pretty much anything, and to the point that this kind of media might be particularly addictive in some ways. Porn is another example, where a little bit is probably not bad for you. If you're watching porn all day, it probably is. So in that question, it's like, no, by itself, a little bit, it's not bad for you. Maybe it could be bad for you if you consumed it in extreme quantities.
Can I just add something to that real quick? So I might disagree with you a little bit on that, because in the sense that wrestling and the Marvel movies and porn, something that all of them have in common, I think, is that they can be damaging if you are uncritical of them. Because if you just it's not a problem that, I don't know, that like teenagers watch porn. The problem is that they watch it and don't have enough of a critical faculty or enough of an intellectual understanding of what sex is actually like, where they take the inherent, they take the unspoken politics of porn and they take that as reality, something like that. The Marvel movies, which I fucking love and have seen almost every single one of them in the theaters. But
me too.
But they are...
I've seen a handful of them, and I really like the ones that I've seen.
And they're great and well acted, and the 30 people who came together as a committee to write the scripts did a remarkable job and that sort of thing. But like
some diminishing returns as they've been making more and more of them, though.
But like if you are not cognizant of the fact that like they are extremely worshipful of the military industrial complex and have like a very, very specific attitude towards, I guess what you could essentially call law enforcement or something like that. Like there is absolutely, I know this is a thing that
unflawed.
They're not unflawed, and they're also like, there are politics in everything. I know this is a very divisive topic, especially in like nerdy communities, but I am definitely of the school of thought that, there is no such thing as a piece of art or entertainment that does not have inherent politics. It might not be talking about electoral politics or anything like that, but there's something political, and I just think you need to be aware of it.
Yeah, and beyond that, like also in terms of the quantity issue, I think part of the worry that guys like Coppola, the real worry that Coppola and Scorsese have beneath their vitriol, is that other cinema is going to kind of go out of business. There's so many fucking superhero movies that, and they're expensive. It's expensive to go see a movie or even to buy one on freaking Amazon or whatever, wherever you're watching your movies, that people are going to forget about the rest of cinema. And they're going to think this is the pinnacle of it or the only game in town. And that's problematic.
Well, another thing about those guys, Scorsese and Coppola, when they came up in the movie industry, they had a specific mission in terms of making art out of movies in Hollywood that they saw as devoid of a lot of art at the time. And so it doesn't surprise me at all that they see the modern stuff that people like and say this isn't art, because they've made careers about saying that movies that they didn't make aren't art since the beginning. They've made some great movies, but I don't know. They can say, first of all, let me say, they can say what they want. They're respected filmmakers. They can have their opinions, and that's fine. But I just think that I think that the spirit of what they're saying is wrong and comes from a place of them just not understanding where the culture is right now, because the culture loves these movies whether or not they understand the problems with them. And when you're talking about the biggest budget films, that's all that matters, really.
And also what they're complaining about is that nobody's making like relatively serious mid-budget dramas, I guess, and it's just like, hey, dude, that's all on TV now.
Yeah, look
like that's the thing. All of the things that they want from cinema are just happening in what we call TV that isn't really even TV.
Or they're not starring old Italian guys.
Yeah,
and hey, I love old Italian guys. My grandpa was an old Italian guy. He lived to be 94. But they're just not starring old Italian guys anymore.
Also, to your point, Doc, the biggest selling movies have always been kind of schlocky, right?
Right. Oh, definitely.
Just because the Marvel Comics logo is on it, it doesn't make it, it doesn't really separate it from like all the freaking cookie cutter action movies that dominated in the 90s.
I'll even go one step further and say that Goodfellas is not really that far removed from superhero movies in terms of it being a power fantasy. I'm not. Maybe that's.
Sure.
Maybe that's
in terms of the politics. Yeah, no, the politics of major, big budget Hollywood films have never been, nuanced and revolutionary. Certainly,
and it also kind of goes into the whole. I'm going to try to tie it back into wrestling now. There's this whole idea of canon, of just like what we accept as the great culture and what we accept as great works of art that we should all agree are great works of art. And there's always an inherent classism there. Yeah. There's absolutely, it is totally rooted in a concept of white supremacy and like saying what art is quote unquote highbrow and sort of real art and what is not. And, wrestling, one of the biggest transformations I have had doing this podcast so far is there's a lot more to it than I ever gave it credit for. There really is. There is so much more here than I would have thought. And there's still, a lot of unbelievably dumb shit that sometimes I'm watching it and I'm like, I can't believe I have agreed to just keep making this podcast and subject myself to this all the time. But there is people are very quick to look down on wrestling.
And this, these things have changed over the, Shakespeare was looked down on as the lowbrow, kind of schlocky entertainment in Shakespeare's time. And, now he's the paragon of the canon. So, yeah, and so these things change. I mean, someone might say, yeah, things have just kept getting worse. But no, I mean, to answer the other two questions, so does wrestling or Marvel movies, but let's bring it back to wrestling, does it have positive value? Well, that's what this podcast is about. We're trying to explain how it does, or at least Doc and I are. Will it attain the level of art of, a Dostoevsky novel or a Picasso painting or something like that? Has it already? Does it have the resources to do so? Well, I'd like to say yes, but that's sort of the open question for me.
I will say I have yet to, for the this match, the Eddie Ray match, is the most I have enjoyed a wrestling match so far. I found it thrilling. I enjoyed watching it. It is hard for me to imagine having a truly emotional reaction to wrestling. It is hard for me to imagine weeping at the beauty or power of a wrestling match. It is hard for me to imagine, like, if we're going to say that the point of art is to elicit various emotional states from somebody, but also I'm not going to say that wrestling is not art, especially because the artistry in the athleticism of a lot of these guys and the way that they communicate with each other and the way that they create a match is very obviously art, is very obviously something that at least could be described as art. But it is
not craft, right? And so sometimes there's a distinction drawn between those things. I don't know. I mean, maybe you have to be, because I definitely have had emotional reactions to pro wrestling. But I think to some degree, and look, no art is completely divorced from consumerism. No artist,
especially in America.
Yeah, and it might be impossible for it to even get any kind of distance now that it may have had in the past. But I think a certain kind of distance from at least the direct demands of making money and keeping your business afloat is necessary in order for things to attain a certain degree of artistry. The artist needs to be free to experiment. You know, you're going to have a promoter who can make a year's worth of wrestling without having to worry about everybody buying each month's pay-per-view or something like that in order for us to possibly get that kind of sophistication.
And like the avant-garde is out there. Like we watch in this week's premium episode, we watch Bryce Remsburg refereeing a match between two invisible guys, and the whole crowd is down with it. I don't know if a crowd of 20,000 or a television crowd of 1 million people or more would be down with it, but it worked in front of the small crowd, so maybe you can add that to the lexicon of the art, and it can develop into something that could eventually be palatable for the masses. Add it a little bit, taken away a little bit, just developing it. So there are those spaces in wrestling for an art to develop. I mean, the WWE has stopped even being like McDonald's and has started just being one continuous commercial for McDonald's, which is not good.
I feel like it's more like Arby's.
Well, they certainly have the meats.
And I don't think it has to be on a mass level. I mean, most of the stuff that's considered serious art these days is actually for a relatively small audience. But yeah, I think the right people need to be involved in it, who have that kind of vision. And I think that's happening. Like, I think the people who are involved in making wrestling and who are consuming wrestling, the profile is changing to the point where there's people who are going to have more of a critical eye, are more demanding, want it to evolve in various ways.
It happened in Mexico, like WWE is not going away, just how like CMLL is not going away. But CMLL will still put on very traditional lucha libre all the time in Mexico City. But in the 90s, AAA came along and said, no, we're doing something different. We're going to give you American-style sports entertainment, which had never been over in Mexico. But they did it with Mexican wrestlers and luchadors, and it was huge. It made a huge impact on the scene and the art in Mexico of lucha libre. CMLL is still chugging along. They still own most of the buildings that they run in, which helps. That way, if business is down, it's not like they're paying rent. But my point is, this can happen in wrestling. I think you're right that it is happening in America now.
One thing that wrestling actually has the advantage of over movies to some degree is wrestling fans don't always expect the good guy to win. Yeah. You can leave them upset. That's kind of part of it. When Brock Lesnar defeated The Undertaker at WrestleMania and ended The Undertaker's undefeated streak, it was genuinely shocking. And there was a hushed silence. People are still upset about that. And they did it. They went for it. They did not satisfy any desires that night. And that's a cool kind of artistic move to make.
And Brock Lesnar is still reaping the rewards. Not just, I can say I beat The Undertaker. There are a lot of reasons why he's seen as a dangerous man. And one of the big ones is that he ended the WrestleMania streak of The Undertaker. If he can beat The Undertaker at WrestleMania, he can beat you.
He beat Kofi Kingston in 5 seconds just recently. He'll make you cry. He'll break your heart.
To quote his manager, Brock Lesnar doesn't care about your children.
You know, the two pieces of superhero media that I would recommend to somebody who only loves quote unquote cinema or art films or something like that are Logan and the show Legion on FX. Both of it, Legion, by far and away the most, I guess, artistically successful piece of superhero media. But Logan, to a lesser degree, but Logan is still like kind of more of a real movie than a lot of the other superhero movies.
You know,
I think that
I
is
Joker.
I have not seen it yet, so I'll have to
seen
save
it
my
yet
takes
either.
for that.
I haven't seen a movie get such a wide variety of reactions. Not just polarizing, I love it, I hate it, but a wide variety of reactions.
I didn't expect to like it at all, and I did.
My point is that Logan and Legion are two things that,
Start with L.
without spoiling anything, yes, they start with that. Without spoiling anything, are allowed to kind of do whatever they want with the story. They're sort of allowed to do kind of whatever they want with the hero, and they end in ways that like are not as concerned with you feeling satisfied in the traditional way. I think that they both end in a way that is very satisfying, but not in a way that you would ever expect from superhero media.
And it's kind of like what you were talking about before, in previous episodes about the audience can't really tell you directly what they want.
Yes.
And especially a sophisticated audience. The more sophisticated you are, the more you have to work to figure out what really will appeal to that kind of audience.
Whereas if you're a dumb audience, you just start screaming that you want, let's say, tables, because that happens all the time.
We want tables.
Yeah, great.
Can
I'll
I
get
ask?
some?
Can I ask, what is a match that you have been moved by? Like,
Well, for instance, I mean that Brock Lesnar Undertaker match. There have been Daniel Bryan matches where I wanted him to win so much, and when he finally won, that was, or even, I hate to say it, when Chris Benoit won the title at WrestleMania 20. I mean, it had been, think about that thing with Eddie Guerrero, right? How his position in WCW, around the time of the match with Rey Mysterio, where, they didn't showcase him at all. They had him get squashed by idiots like Steve McMichael and that kind of thing. So imagine being a fan of someone like that, and they've never gotten their due. Then they get to the WWE and they start showcasing them a little bit more, but still they're being used to put over other guys the whole time. And then finally, that guy gets to the main event of WrestleMania against the two most overexposed guys in the company, Triple H and Shawn Michaels. And you're like, you know what? They're still not going to let them win. Because they've put them almost to that point a couple of times and they've taken away from them, and then they finally fucking win. And it was Benoit and Eddie Guerrero embracing with the two titles at the end of the match, and it was just beautiful.
And a few years later, the both of them were dead.
That's a whole other thing, yeah. And we should cover that Benoit triple threat in detail eventually, because that's one of my favorite matches of all time. And one of the most emotional moments in the history of wrestling.
And Benoit's come up too much where we're going to have to finally just have our episode about.
That's what makes that tragedy so fucking sad. We loved Benoit.
Man. He was
deeply.
We considered him the best wrestler in the world, and
and we had already lost Eddie by then.
Yeah, we lost Eddie, and it was tragic. It was really tragic.
If it weren't for guys like Daniel Bryan and CM Punk at the time, who were not only really great wrestlers who we loved, but guys who were like relatively clean living, I probably would have stopped watching wrestling after the Benoit thing. But I was already invested in those guys.
Alrighty, well, this minisode. We got more stuff.
We got all sorts of stuff. We haven't really reflected on any of the scramble cage melee stuff.
Oh my god!
We thought that was great when we first saw it because we'd never seen anything like it. Looking back on it, it's absolute garbage.
I want to mention that Jack Evans was signed to AEW. He is now on TNT every week.
Really good.
They Kevin Smith and Jason Mewes were on to promote Clerks 3, and Jack Evans and Jason Mewes met face to face, and I was like I was seeing double. It was like I was seeing double.
Yeah,
they're the same guy, based. You know, they look
if
alike.
instead of doing a lot of drugs, he worked out, that would be the difference between Jason Mewes
well,
and Jack Evans.
not instead. I don't think.
He worked out and did drugs.
Yeah.
Probably not as many drugs as Jason Mewes.
I wanted to mention, since you mentioned Cirque du Soleil, they did this kind of cool thing where the NXT trainees and met the Cirque du Soleil trainees, and they like spent a day in each other's training
Oh,
camps.
damn.
Yeah.
That was kind of cool.
What was that? I'd never seen that.
Oh no! All right, I gotta send that to both of you guys.
Yeah,
I would.
That sounds very
I
interesting.
checked it out.
I
I get, that would make sense. I bet if you did that aerial training, that aerial,
Yeah.
whatever, is it just called aerial gymnastics? or-
Aerialism, like up on a ribbon.
Yeah, I bet if you did a lot of that would help your wrestling
Oh
skills.
yeah. I know a woman who's an aerialist who just got in the business. She's wrestling as a Vita Von Star. She's
Yeah.
great. Everybody go look her up. She's an incredible athlete.
I know somebody who does it who should be a wrestler. Who you should actually talk to
Yeah.
her and convince her to be a wrestler.
Oh man, if you want to do it, you get in. If
We-
you don't.
We also mentioned the wrestler Homicide. Wanted to point out that
that.
he is on NWA Power
Right.
now every week.
Oh, well, speaking about giving the artists some power, like as you Evan were talking about, one of the things that I really like about that show is that the promos are clearly unscripted. It's, they tell you where you're going with it, but it's not like here's every line like in all the WWE promos with people who can't deliver lines. It's all right, you're going to challenge this guy. You have 45 seconds, go.
They feel like real people
Yeah.
for that reason.
They feel like real people. It helps. It really helps.
I had also mentioned during the episode that, just jumping off the top of a cage, someone might remember that happened, but they won't necessarily remember you. Mick Foley, in this Hell in a Cell match, which we should also watch eventually, he jumped off the cage and people remembered that it was Foley. And it was very important, the context of all of that. So we'll talk about that eventually.
In a way, all of them were just paying tribute to him.
I also wanted to mention, because Evan, you had asked, does the booker ask people to do this crazy shit? And we said, and I think you asked Doc about Chikara because he spent a lot of time there. And we had pointed out that actually Mike Quackenbush is more likely to tell you not to do crazy shit.
Yeah, most promoters will be, if the context is right, they might ask you to do a stunt. But for the most part, they want people to conserve their bodies, not destroy them.
And I wanted to shout out Cajun Crawdad, who took that power bomb from PCO on the floor, and he probably shouldn't have done that.
He probably shouldn't have done that. I love you, Crawdaddy. Take care of yourself, dude. Really, take care of yourself. We want you to have a long and fruitful career, and you don't need to be doing stuff like that, man.
I guess that's pretty much it. I don't know if I really need to mention this, but I'll say it anyway. You can cut it if you don't think it's if it's good. But at the end of the episode, I said I was plugging my stuff. I mentioned something about my Mercy College faculty page, and I said I have one for now, and that was actually a callback to some off-color remarks I had said at the beginning of the show. That
now that you've been fired, it's very sad in retrospect.
No, that I was worried might get me in trouble, but that you actually cut. So the joke at the end didn't really make sense. I just want Mercy College to know that I didn't mean that I'm planning to leave or anything like that. I am happy there. And I do have a faculty page and will continue to have a faculty page at Mercy College for at least the next few years and hopefully for a long time after that.
I didn't even realize that happened. I'm sorry.
That's all right. You can't catch everything.
It'll be, I really should be saving all of the stuff that I cut, and so we can one day just release an 8-hour supercut of us stuttering, making weird noises, and the horrible off-color jokes that are very off-brand for us.
They're not that off-brand.
No, not if you know us personally, but if you only know us in podcast form.
It was a lot worse years ago.
Well, I don't know. The premium episode coming up.
But still.
Well, we'll see how much of
We'll
that
see.
ends up being in
We'll
there.
see how much stays
That's
in.
the thing. That's the wonderful thing about editing is that I can present a lie about.
Also, you tell us. Are we turning you off by talking about, etc.?
Look, the only subject that is non-negotiable is wrestling. Everything else, if you really don't want us to say stuff about it, tell us.
Tell us if we're not funny. That's my constant fear. That's why I left comedy. I was worried I wasn't funny, and that tension and stress just turned out to be too great for me.
We need your approval. We're fragile people.
Yeah, that's the whole reason. We're podcasters. Obviously, we need attention, but don't want to go out in public. So
I could just be playing video games right now, but I'm not. I want to produce something.
Yeah.
Then I can go play video games.
Yeah. Then you can check out our Twitch page, which
Yeah.
doesn't exist yet, but will soon.
Everyone.
Yeah. We're going to try not to have to go into porn. Not that that's a bad career for anyone to pursue, but I don't think Mercy College would like it if I did that.
Somebody's got to make that money.
On that note,
that's my second do the right thing reference today.
Oh wait, let's yeah.
This is our Minisode. Our episode that we got coming out on Monday is going to be my first time ever seeing a Hulk Hogan match.
Okay.
Episode 5 is going to feature Hulk Hogan versus some guy that I've never heard of, named
Dwayne.
Dwayne, yeah, some Dwayne guy.
What a stupid name.
Apparently he's a cook.
Yeah, he's always talking about cooking, and I follow him on Instagram, and his weight room is larger than any apartment I've ever lived in.
Yes. It's amazing. He gets up at 3:30 and just starts selfieing in the weight room. Like, well, this is what it takes. It's like, all right.
I forget what the bad match is.
If you don't know who we're talking about, he was the star of Doom.
Yeah, the star of Doom.
He was framed as the star of Doom. The real star of Doom was Carl Urban.
Doom was terrible.
It was terrible.
Yeah.
I saw it twice. There's a
saw
long story behind. I've only seen. Oh yeah, that's the one thing I want to address. I have noticed listening back to a lot of these that I'm a lot more repetitive than I thought I was, which fills me with a real kind of dread. I've seen like 50 movies, so when I refer to like the same movies a couple times, that's just because I haven't seen a lot of movies. I'm more of a TV guy.
I also remember you telling me that you and one of your really good friends were such good friends because you both had such bad memories that you could just tell each other the same stories over and over again, and neither of you got tired of it.
Yeah, that was you.
No, that wasn't me.
Do you see? Well, this is how bad your memory is.
There you go.
Alrighty, this has been Contesting Wrestling.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.